everyone. I do have to apologize to begin. My camera does not seem to be working, so we will just operate as if you can see me. So Nick and I are going to be discussing this highly important topic on individualized independent educational evaluations, or as we like to call them, IEEs in the education world. So this is something that, Nick and I deal with a lot in a lot of our cases, and we think it's one of, the most frequent things that we deal with, so we're happy to be discussing it today. So as you can see, this is me who is speaking, Sivan Zak, and I'm joined by Nicholas Marricco, who is my colleague and partner in crime in all things education at Tully Rinckey. Next slide, please, Taylor. So what are independent educational evaluations, or IEEs as we like to call them? They're defined under the law as an evaluation that's conducted by a qualified examiner who is not employed by the public agency responsible for the education of the child in question. And when we say public agency, we mean the school district that your child attends. So the whole purpose of an independent educational evaluation is to have sort of unbiased third party evaluate your child in whatever area that may be. So some types of evaluations could be a psychological evaluation or an educational evaluation that takes place in the classroom to assess, different areas of need that your child may have. So the biggest tool in a parent's toolbox for IEEs is the fact that they are at public expense, and the school district is supposed to either provide the funds for the evaluation to take place, they pay for the full cost of that evaluation, or they have to ensure that you have access to that evaluation, and the purpose of them is to be at no cost to the parent. So the parent and the public agency, so that's typically the school district, as I said, have responsibilities and obligations when a parent's right to an IEE is triggered. Next slide, please. So as the parent, when should you request an IEE? So first and foremost, and as a baseline, under the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal law that sort of governs this area, school districts are required to conduct comprehensive evaluations of students either suspected of having a disability or students who are already deemed eligible to receive special education services. So they have to conduct regular evaluations of your child to determine, how they're performing at school, if anything is sort of hindering their access to their education. Regular evaluations need to take place. So sometimes these evaluations can take place annually, but at the very least, they have to take place every 3 years. And this is called a triennial evaluation. And when we say comprehensive evaluation, it's not just that they have to conduct, a classroom observation of your child. They need to go in depth, really evaluate every area of suspected disability. So perhaps your child has a speech delay. They have to make sure that that is evaluated and that assessments are conducted to determine what your child's performance level is, what their baseline is. And so this can take place either annually, but like I said, at the very least, every 3 years. So once the school district gets an opportunity to evaluate your child, and you receive those evaluation results and you review them either with an attorney or an advocate or just yourself, and you disagree with either the results, the methods, the evaluation as a whole, how they characterized your child, any part of the evaluation, you are entitled to request an IEE at public expense from the school district. And so we often recommend that these requests take place in writing and that you specify exactly which evaluation you disagree with. This helps, not only the school district assess which evaluation that they need to provide funds for, but also helps you sort of understand which evaluations are not something that you agree with, and maybe you agree with the psychological but not the speech, so it makes it a lot easier if you just specify which one you disagree with. And so while the school district can request an explanation as to why you may disagree with that evaluation, you're not required to provide an explanation. You just have to say something very blanket like, I received this result and I disagree with it, so I'm requesting an IEE at public expense for XYZ evaluation. Next slide, please. So how does this happen? How do you request an IEE from the school district? So we typically recommend this four-step process, though there's a variety of ways that it could take place. So I find it most effective when the parent presents the school district with a private professional evaluator that's not employed by the school district, that you find yourself that is willing and able to conduct the evaluation. So that would be the first step. Then you would contact that evaluator and obtain their availability to conduct the evaluation, narrow down dates that work for you, and you would obtain their hourly rate, the total rate for the evaluation, and how much it's going to cost the district. Then once you have all that information, you can make the request in writing to the either Committee of Special Education, which is the CSE, or the Director of Pupil Services at the school district. Either one works depending on which one is sort of governing at your school district. So if you can't locate a provider on your own, and sometimes that happens, we'll either recommend that you speak with your child's pediatrician, who can assist in locating private and professional evaluators, or the school district is required to provide information on where you can obtain IEEs if you request it from them. So if you don't happen to have an evaluator beforehand, you don't know who can do it, you can certainly request that the Committee on Special Education provide you with those resources. Okay, next slide. So what are the school district's obligation when a parent requests an IEE? And when I say this is, what do they have to do after the fact? So once a parent requests an IEE at public expense, the school district, without unnecessary delay, has to either file a due process complaint to request a hearing to defend their own evaluations, or they must provide you with the IEE at public expense. Those are really their only two options. You see a lot of cases where a parent requests an IEE and the school district just ignores them. That is not one of the two options that the federal law allows. So either the district has to file the due process complaint, or they provide the evaluation at public expense. And if they, you find yourself in a scenario where the school district does ignore your request, you could also then initiate a due process complaint to show that you're entitled to the IEE because the school district did not comply with one of the two requirements that are present on the screen. So if the school district does file a due process complaint and the hearing officer determines that the evaluation conducted by the school district was appropriate, you still have a right as the parent to an IEE, but it would not be at public expense. So when we say this, it means that you can still go to a private evaluator and have your child evaluated, but that would be at your own expense. But we do always recommend that if you do this, regardless of whether it's an IEE or you're just, privately evaluating your child, that you share this information with the school district, because it's always helpful for the Committee on Special Education to develop IEP services, goals, have a better characterization of your child for the IEP or the 504 plan. So we always recommend that you share all evaluative data with the CSE, regardless of whether it's an IEE or a private evaluation at private expense. But on the flip side of that, if the hearing officer determines that the school district's evaluation was not appropriate, they order the school district to provide the IE at public expense. So they would require that the school district pay for the evaluator that you presented, and they would have to comply with that order. So as I mentioned before, when an IEE is requested by a parent, the school district has to take one of the two actions listed above. They either have to file a due process complaint to defend their own evaluation, or they have to provide the parent with the IEE at public expense. Next slide.
You want to talk about
Oh, sure, go ahead.
how long we would consider without unnecessary delay? So I think with this one, the way the law is written is it just provides the district, it's a better way to look at this is also just a reasonable amount of time to provide the IEE. But as Sivan said, if the school district is just ignoring you and it's been weeks, consider filing a due process complaint or consider filing a SECA complaint. Sivan, do you want to talk about SECA complaints and maybe how this would apply to the district's refusal to even answer you?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great segue into that. And you do make a really good point there. The law really doesn't define, unnecessary delay. Um, and we tend to kind of play around with that and see what would be considered unnecessary delay. Some people could read that and say a week is unnecessary delay, but we typically see that, if a response if a request is made for an IEE and the school district doesn't respond within a month, I would say that probably constitutes unnecessary delay. About 4 weeks is a sufficient amount of time for the school district to review your request, see if your evaluator is appropriate. So I would say probably around a month if I was going to assess it. But as Nick said, another option aside from filing a due process complaint is what we call a SECA complaint. So a SECA complaint is the Special Education Quality Assurance Department of the New York State Education Department. And they field, complaints regarding school districts not complying with the law. So when a school district, either violates your child's IEP, doesn't follow it, doesn't provide the services, doesn't respond to a request to an IEE, you could file a SECA complaint and have an independent, investigator from the SECA department look into your claims, conduct an investigation, and they would make a determination on whether or not the school district violated FAPE, which is a free appropriate public education, which is what every child with a disability is entitled to under the law. So if they have a finding that, the school district violated a FAPE or just the IDEA in general, they can typically make a ruling and make recommendations for what the school district should do next. Is there anything else you want to
Now,
add to that,
Sivan,
Nick? Yeah.
yeah. So one question that Sivan and I get all the time is should the parent file a SECA complaint or should the parent file a due process complaint? Every case is different. Every case is different. There is no clear-cut rule. A good rule of thumb, however, could be how quickly do you need this evaluation done? How quickly do you need this evaluation done? If you need the evaluation done in the next month, you could try for due process, try to resolve it through the resolution process. And if you're confused about what the resolution process is, lucky for you, there is a webinar on YouTube and a webinar on our firm bio that details exactly what to do with due process complaints. So if you need the evaluation done, yesterday, due process might be a better option for you. Just know with due process comes the resolution meeting, presumably the hearing, discovery. Whereas with the SECA complaint, as Sivan eloquently described, you file the complaint, and guess what? The state does all the work. The state looks into your claim. The school district has to respond to the state's questions. And at the end of it, if you file the complaint and you clearly articulate what the issue is, hopefully SECA finds in your favor. Now you take that SECA order, you give it to the school district, and you demand they provide you the IEE. Now, in that scenario, if the school district says no, mom, I know you're entitled to the IEE under federal law. I know you're entitled to the IE to be paid for under federal law. And I know the state of New York just said we denied your client his or her federally guaranteed education rights. Despite all that, we're still not going to do the IE. You got to file a due process complaint. At that point, you have given the school district every opportunity to do the IE. In that scenario, a due process complaint quite literally is your only option. But a SECA complaint, again, once you file it, they have 60 days to get back to you. They have 60 days to get back to you. They will get back to you within 60 days, but guess what? It might take 60 days. So think about the options. If you're ever presented with a scenario like this and you're not entirely sure, do I do SECA? Do I do a due process complaint? Did I even request the IEE correctly? You should probably give us a call. and we can help explain to you what your options are. But Sivan, sorry for that rant. As Sivan knows, I love talking about IEEs. I could talk about IEEs for hours, but Sivan, please, yeah, definitely, yeah.
No, I completely agree. I think that that's such helpful information because, the SECA investigation results too can really help bolster a parent's claim, especially before going
Right.
into due process. I think, if you have another state department that has investigated your claim and found in your favor, I can only see how it would assist you in making a case. So yeah, it's a great point, and I thank you for bringing that up, Nick, on the SECA complaints, because they're another tool, just like the IEEs in a parent's toolbox, that can truly, assist in a way that isn't as daunting as due process, which can, be a hearing and go through a very arduous and extensive process. So yeah, it is something we also recommend for a lot of our clients in these scenarios. So thank you, Nick.
You're very
Okay,
welcome.
Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you. You're very welcome. You're
I
very
think
welcome.
we can go to the next slide, please. I'm not sure it changed slides. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So, back to the IEEs after our little conversation on due process and SECA. School
SECA
districts,
segue.
the SECA segue. School districts do have criteria for IEEs that, parents need to consider when they're looking for private evaluators to evaluate their children. Because the law requires that any IEE that takes place, and in order for the district to actually authorize payment for that IEE, the evaluator and the evaluation to be conducted needs to follow the same type of criteria that the school district would follow to conduct their own evaluations. So in order for it to be conducted at public expense, the school district can require that that IEE meet the same criteria. And, that's something that parents really need to consider when looking for evaluators to conduct private evaluations. So this criteria could include things like the location of the evaluation, the qualifications of the examiner, the types of assessments that are going to be used in the evaluation. These are all things that the school district can require that the evaluation comply with. So, for example, if we're looking at, a educational evaluation, you wouldn't think that an educational evaluation would take place in the student's home, because the educational evaluation needs to take place where the child is receiving their education. So unless your child is, being homeschooled or something like that, you would assume that an educational evaluation would take place in the classroom so that the evaluator can look at how the student is interacting with their education in the actual classroom. Another point on the qualifications of the examiner is you wouldn't have an occupational therapist conduct a speech language therapy evaluation. Obviously, that would be inappropriate. So there's definitely some criteria that the school district can require that the evaluator actually comply with. And so while that IEE has to meet the same criteria, the school district can't impose additional criteria on the IEE that it would not abide by itself. So they can't require something in extent of, what they would actually do themselves. So if the school district conducts all of its psychological evaluations in a one-to-one setting with the psychologist, it can't then require that your IEE take place in another alternate location. They have to do the same exact thing. They can agree to less, but they cannot impose more. Next slide, please. So I know that this was a lot of information, and IEEs are it's a small portion of the law, but it's a big portion, I think, of a child's educational career, because they really happen so often, and parents really often disagree with the evaluations that the school district conducts. And in order for you to have a clear and accurate picture of your child, this is one of the most useful tools that you can have. Especially when you are a parent who disagrees with the special education classification that this Committee on Special Education has given your child. So this could mean, you know, your child has an autism diagnosis, but they classified your child as other health impairment, and you disagree with that classification. Sometimes an IEE can really help shed light on which, you know, classification is appropriate. The same thing goes for the services that are recommended on the IEP. If you disagree with, you know, 1 time a week of speech and you are looking for 3 times a week of speech because you think that that's what your child needs, you can have an outside provider conduct that evaluation to see if, you know, that assertion that your child needs 3 sessions of speech per week would be supported. So I think it's helpful to have that, you know, sort of outside look. This is also really helpful for just an overall description of your child that's developed by the school district on their IEP. So the IEP is supposed to be this very comprehensive document that describes your child to any person who would read it. If the evaluations conducted by the school district don't touch on enough of, you know, what you think your child's capabilities are or their weaknesses, you know, an IEE can really help establish what that, you know, characterization would be. So I do want to note that it's very important for all parents to know that you're only entitled to an IEE at public expense after each time the district conducts its own evaluation. So you can't request an IEE twice on the same evaluation, because theoretically you would, you know, the school district would conduct an evaluation, you would disagree with it and receive an IEE, but then you wouldn't disagree with your own evaluation that you obtained by a private provider. So it wouldn't make sense for a parent to sort of get another bite at the apple and say they disagree with the evaluation again and request that another IEE take place. So I just want to repeat that again, that parents are only entitled to an IEE after each time the school district conducts its own evaluation. And like I said earlier, that could take place annually, or it could take place that every 3 years. So really you're looking at probably an IEE request after every 3 years. If that's the case, I would say that's probably the maximum that you would see a parent get. So another important piece that I know we've touched on a couple times here is that when you do request an IEE, you have to make sure you do so in writing. It's so much easier to have a paper trail and to know when you actually requested that evaluation, because like we said, there is unnecessary delay. They have to respond within a reasonable time. And so if you have it in writing and you know exactly when you requested it, it makes it a lot easier to sort of count the days since you've done so and to know if the school district has either responded appropriately or not responded at all. And when I say in writing, we typically recommend that this happen via email. It seems to be the easiest way for it to take place, but theoretically it could happen via snail mail, through a letter, whatever is easiest for you. So I know we also touched on this, but if you are unable to locate an evaluator yourself, you can request that information from the school district on where you can receive an IEE. And the school district has to either provide you with, you know, resources. So that could be actual evaluators, it could be clinics, it could be a website where they have, you know, approved evaluators. Whatever the case may be, they actually have to help you obtain that evaluation. So also ensure that the IEE that you select meets the school district's criteria, as we talked about on the last slide, so that it can be considered without issue. You don't want to be in a situation where you find an evaluator and then the school district denies it because the evaluator is not qualified to actually conduct that evaluation. Because even if you obtained it privately, they could then contest it when you do share the results. And I think it just makes it a much more seamless process when you ensure that that IEE meets the district's criteria. And so lastly, if you do request an IEE, the school district has to either provide it to you or issue a due process complaint to defend its own evaluations. This is the crux of IEEs. There are 2 options that the school district has when you request it, and this is where most of the contention around this comes from, is did the school district respond in an appropriate time? Did they respond without unnecessary delay? You know, you're in a situation where they either have to file their own hearing or they have to give it to you. There are no other options. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Nick?
No, I think the IEEs are one of the most powerful tools in a parent's toolbox. And I always say this, and Sivan knows I say this all the time to our clients, that the best advocate for a child is their parents. If you receive an evaluation and you know that evaluation does not correctly describe your child, I would request an IE. I would request an IE. Now, as Sivan knows, it could be a little challenging to contest an inappropriate IEP a due process complaint, but the best way to challenge an evaluation at a due process complaint is to have one that accurately describes your child. So if you get the evaluation, you know it does not correctly describe your child, or if it was done by someone who's not properly certified, request the IE. That's your best tool in your toolbox in that moment. And as Sivan said, we see these all the time. And school district, especially a lot of these evaluators, um, they just want to get the evaluation over with. They don't try not to specify for each child. They just want to go through the list of their kids for that day, do the evaluations. Most of them read exactly the same. So as a parent, you see that, you got to do the IE. Now, what's interesting is when we look at IEEs and then compare them to public school evaluations, you often see the IEEs are far more detailed and far more accurate to the child. That's because, again, the private evaluator is taking her time to go and speak with the child, speak with your child. So if you really disagree with the public school evaluation, your best tool is to review. If you ever need help doing it, feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Nick. Okay, so I think, that is the crux of IEEs at a very basic level. And I think, Taylor, you can hit the next slide. Yeah, so, I think there's a lot to discuss about IEEs. And as Nick said, we can go on and on about this for hours. And we often do. We talk about these for so long and try and strategize the best way to obtain them, and the best way to help our clients to, have a really accurate picture of their children, because that seems to be the most, important thing, especially when developing an IEP or a 504 plan for them, and figuring out what services would be best. Obviously, this is a very complicated and complex issue, and it can sometimes feel really daunting, especially for parents who are dealing with so much with their children, and we know that this can be difficult. So I do just want to reiterate what Nick has said, that we are always available to answer any questions or to help you obtain these, to help on the back end after you've received them. We do this all the time, so we are more than happy to assist in any way that we can.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Sivan said, this is an extremely powerful tool in a parent's toolbox to properly advocate for their children. We've all seen this with school districts where they simply, they can ignore a parent's plea, they can ignore a parent's request for an IE, but the law requires them. And the law requires they only do those two things that Sivan said. So if you ever feel like a school district is unnecessarily delaying your IEE, the IEE that you're guaranteed under federal law to receive, we're happy to help. Our two favorite things, Sivan, I'll speak for Sivan and I, and I'm sure Sivan will not object to this. Our two favorite things in this world are IEEs and negotiating with school districts. Those are our two
Yeah.
favorite things on earth. There are no other things that we enjoy more. So if we can help you get an IE for your child or help you receive one, whether it's through a negotiation or through due process, you would have us do our two favorite things. So we're always happy to help.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it, and we wish you all the best.